You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions at theoptionsinsider.com. Bitcoin, Ether, Ripple, Litecoin, and more. Cryptocurrencies and other digital assets are taking the financial world by storm. This exploding market provides everything a savvy trader needs: volatility, volume, and liquidity. Provided you know how to find it. That's where we come in. Welcome to the Crypto Rundown. Each week, we'll break down the latest trading activity, trends, and developments on everything from coins to tokens, futures, and even OTC options. If it's moving the crypto markets, then you'll find it on the Crypto Rundown. This program is brought to you by Genesis Volatility, also known as GVol, home of institutional-grade crypto options analytics. Whether you're trading CeFi options or DeFi options, cryptocurrencies move. Use GVol Analytics to analyze implied volatility, model realized volatility, structure positions, and unlock alpha. For more information, visit gvol.io. That's GVOL.io. Now it's time to dive into the exploding world of cryptocurrencies and digital assets. It's time for the Crypto Rundown.
All right, everybody. That music means it is time once again for the Crypto Rundown, the program here on the Options Insider Radio Network, where we go beyond our traditional stomping grounds of your SPYs, your Apples, your Teslas, your VIXes, and all that other fun stuff, and move a little bit farther afield into the world of Bitcoin and ETH and all of that fun stuff. Going to talk the volume, the volatility, the SKEW, and a whole bunch more. My name is Mark Longo from theoptionsinsider.com, as well as, of course, on the aforementioned network. Remind me, if you haven't joined us already, the optionsinsider.com/plus and /pro have been quite the fun ride over the course of the last, it's like about 6+ weeks or so. Got a great double pro week coming up this week. 2 pro Q&As. You guys love them so much. Giving you a twofer this week. We've got Mr. Ewan Sinclair, the vol author and trader and researcher extraordinaire, as well as Mr. Simon Ho, a frequent guest of this program, creator of BitVol. So if you want to ask him about crypto volatility, he's probably the guy to talk to, as well as, of course, the creator of Spikes, a new VIX competitor out there as well. So great twofer on the pro Q&A front. You guys know where to go to learn more about that. theoptionsinsider.com/pro is the place to go. And wherever you get this show live after the fact, so you make sure you keep those questions coming. We do love to hear from all of you guys and gals out there. Let's see who we're hearing from on the old Crypto Rundown this week. I'm pleased to be joined once again by Eric KOVALAK. He is the managing partner over there at VELLUM Capital. Eric, welcome back to the Crypto Rundown program.
Hey, Mark. Thanks for good with you.
All right, Eric, there's a lot to get to, so let's dive right on in. It is time for the Bitcoin Breakdown.
It's time to explore the latest trending activity, trends, and developments across the world's leading crypto market. It's time for the Bitcoin Breakdown.
All right, everybody. Welcome to the Bitcoin Breakdown, the portion of the show where we do just that. We break down all the action in the world's leading digital asset. Of course, we're talking about the big dog, Bitcoin, a little bit smaller than it was on our last show. Remember, on our last episode, listeners, Bitcoin was flirting around the 3,300 level, about 33,111 or so. Coming into today's show, a little bit lower than that, shy of the 31,000 levels, about 30,800 right before we kicked off. The show has trended down a little bit, down to about 30,600 or so now. Had quite the range over the course of the past week. Got as high as about pretty much right around where it was at our show, a little bit north of that. 33,300 and change was kind of the high for the week, and it threatened the 30K level a little bit earlier in the session, 30,400 and change, of course, as the broad market is getting caught up in this sell-off. Crypto is playing ball as well. A lot to unpack, but before we get to that, Eric, it's been a little bit since you joined us. In fact, you joined us last time on January 11th of this year. My goodness, a lot has happened in the world of crypto since your last appearance. Let me see if I can just sum it up for our audience really quickly. We had, of course, the explosion at the beginning of the year. A lot of that was that Musk-fueled kind of just madness surrounding Bitcoin, rallying all the way up to 65,000, now coming off the latter half of that, as I mentioned, just threatening 30,000 earlier this morning. So a lot to unpack. Catch us up. What's been lighting up your tape over there in the land of VELLUM since the last time we chatted, Eric?
Yeah, sure. Well, what's interesting is you can buy Bitcoin for about the same price as you could the last time I was on.
That's true. A whole bunch of nothing. Nothing has happened at all, Eric. We might as well just hang up now.
You didn't miss anything. But I think what is probably the most substantial economic difference between then and now is that everything smaller than Bitcoin down the capitalization ladder, smaller than ETH, but get down to XRP and the things below that, those have not gone back to their beginning of the year prices. So while Bitcoin is quite close to where it started the year, a lot of the other assets are actually still up 1x, 2x, 3x from where they started at the beginning of the year. So that's a very good indicator of a maturing market, that other assets in the same class are starting to get some capital growth. So I think it's overall a very positive thing, even though it feels like we just did a ground loop.
So what you're saying, I think, if I can read between the lines, is you're all in on Doge now. That's what I'm hearing.
No. Actually, to be clear, I think the current pricing in the market represents some frustration with the lack of progress in the crypto industry as a whole. If I could just riff for a minute, I think there are a lot of crypto holders, HODLers or whatever they call themselves, who are waiting for a great convergence in this market, meaning that they're going to make a bunch of money when crypto makes a big move in reaction to something else happening in the ambient environment. So they're hoping that some external event to the crypto markets are going to force, planet Earth to suddenly wake up and realize someday that we need to trigger this emergence, and there's a new appreciation for crypto that we never realized before. And there's several things I don't like about this situation we're in. First, the narratives are bad. So all of the narratives, either fiat currency collapsing, societal dislocation, there's too much focus on a narrative of the disruptables versus the distributed outcomes, which is, everything but, ledger-based cryptocurrencies and digital assets. I mean, it's important for our sanity that we remember competition. It's not the aim of the market space. It's a natural byproduct of the reality we all face, which is scarcity, and we all have limited means. So it's fairly detrimental to the crypto markets that the only good thing that can happen to crypto is a bad thing for everything else. So the reality of it is most people are fairly content with the way things are now in their current situation. And so it's something that crypto markets need to consider. The second is that the greatest, if we believe that we're waiting for something external to the crypto market to happen to make the prices go up, what we're really saying is that the greatest days of crypto innovation are behind us. If we've built our very best innovations, then why would we need to worry about reactions to some other substandard thing in our environment? The reality is crypto is in no way immune to everything else in our economy, and that's because there's alternatives. So alternatives that a majority of our society believes to be, like I say, not that bad. So crypto exists because it's a superior solution, but it hasn't carved out a defensible market space. And so I find this very frustrating, being in the crypto market and being here after 13 years of ambition with this idea with such tremendous scale, and it's a very good idea. I think we have to really look back and think. Remember, PayPal IPO'd in 3 years, and we're 13 years with Bitcoin, and most people on the street couldn't trade you Bitcoin for a hot dog or whatever else. That's not particularly encouraging. Now, I'm not here necessarily I don't want to curb the enthusiasm completely, Mark, but I think we need to have a real look at why we're here and the continued waves of inconclusive hype. Are they actually representing an acceptable course for cryptocurrencies that are so important for our world?
I think that's a good point that you raised. Sometimes when you're talking to crypto folks, it's somewhat analogous to talking to people who manage tail risk funds out there, where the only scenarios they talk about that are good for them are just apocalyptic for the rest of the world. And so there is a little bit of similarity between those two, which I think is worth discussing. I also want to touch on something that I know is top of mind for a lot of people. I think we probably have some listener questions about this now, but we should get into it now because it is lighting up the tape again today. One of the other narratives that has driven a lot of crypto adoption, particularly in the Bitcoin realm, over the course of the past year has been this idea, this notion that crypto as a whole, but Bitcoin in particular, is this uncorrelated / sometimes some people say inversely correlated asset out there that you should have some in your portfolio because it's not going to perform the same as everything else. And yet, yet another day like today here, Eric, where we're seeing sell-offs across the broad market and equities and just about everything else you could pick your finger at is selling off today. And Bitcoin not doing its own thing, but actually outpacing that sell-off to the downside. So what are your thoughts on this continued argument that Bitcoin and crypto are asset classes unto themselves and they don't move with everything else, Eric?
Well, I think the premise is wrong completely. The point of Bitcoin is that it is supposed to be a consensus-driven intermediary of exchange, a currency, right? If it's consensus-driven, and that's better than being driven by any other fundamental metric, right? It's more fluid, it's more accurate, it's more universal to more people. But if it's consensus-driven, then how can it be disassociated with anything else in the world? It has to be affected by everything else in some way. So if U.S. financial markets remain to this day the largest traded markets in the world as a single country stock market, then obviously they're going to have an effect on Bitcoin. And because they're both based in the same notional currency, they're probably going to move together. And that's what we've seen. What's more interesting is who moves first. Leaders and laggers is the real interesting equation here. But my reflection on today, I was actually really quite pleased because in our internal committee here at the fund, we were concerned that we're going to get a real washout moment in Bitcoin this morning. And when futures ticked down 800, I think it was a little before the open or a little after the open this morning on the Dow, I was really quite pleased that Bitcoin hadn't reacted more. I take that as a very positive thing. I'm not saying it's the end of the horizontal and slightly downward trend in Bitcoin, but it certainly showed a bit of resilience that I wasn't expecting. So not all bad.
Interesting. That's an argument I've made for a while too, is that, Bitcoin doesn't exist in a vacuum. Other things, other pressures, funds that hold other things. When they have to liquidate, they have to sell kind of everything. So there's many pressures that exist that keep Bitcoin at least somewhat correlated to the rest of the outside world. Let's see, speaking of that correlation, what's going on out there in Bitcoin, let's dive right on into it. Remember, listeners, all of these analytics coming at you courtesy of our friends over there at Genesis Volatility, aka GVol. So gvol.io is the place to go to kick the tires and light the fires. On a day like today, you probably want to arm yourself with some analytics. So gvol.io is the place to go. If you did that, you'd see that the Bitcoin 1 hour vol hovering right around an 81.5 coming at the start of the show, which is actually not that far removed from where it was on our show last week. We were right about an 80% last week, but it has spiked up. That's because it was trending even lower coming into today's session. Listeners, it was getting into the 70s when this sell-off started exacerbating again. So that brought it right back up kind of in line to where we were again last week. We're seeing similar levels out there in BitVol. Remember I mentioned Simon Ho is going to be joining us on our Pro Q&A tomorrow. He is the creator of BitVol, and that is loosely the Bitcoin VIX out there, that what folks are throwing around. People are talking about it. You can see it for yourselves over there at T3 Index or over there at LedgerX. I do believe they disseminated there as well. It was at an 88 on our last show. Coming into today's show at about an 83.5. So slightly kind of reflecting again that little bit of a sell-off we had seen in vol since our last show until pretty much this morning. 1 hour skew, that's that 30-20 skew. So that full strip of options from the 30 delta down to the 20 delta. If you don't know what the heck I'm talking about, check out our educational programs here on the network, Options Bootcamp, Options Playbook Radio. Two great places for you to start there. On our last show, the skew was kind of nothing. It was about a half a point bid to the call side. So it was pretty much equal in both directions pretty much. Today, not so much, as you might imagine. Coming in is about a -4, a little over 4.5, about 4.65. So we're seeing a pronounced negative swing here in the skew, which again, given what we're seeing out there in the broad crypto space, not exactly surprising. What is surprising is that coming into today's show, the outstanding open interest out there in Bitcoin in terms of the calls was pretty much exactly the same as it was last show. It was about 75,600 on our last show, and coming into today's show, 75,600. So the call OI hasn't budged net since our last show, which is no mean feat. It takes a lot to keep it exactly the same week to week, but that's what we have on our hands this week, listeners. In terms of the puts, those have ticked up. That's not surprising. 51,200 of those on the tape this week. It's up nearly 5,000 contracts from last week. But again, as we continue to maybe threaten that 30,000 strike to the dark side, we're going to see more of those puts popping up on the radar. Eric, anything out there surprising you so far from what we broke down here from a vol perspective? It's effectively unched from where it was this time week, a little bit frothier than it was this time last week. The SKEW obviously showing a little bit more bias to the downside. Any of that surprising you? Or is that pretty much what you've been seeing on your analytics as well, sir?
A little bit. Proportionally, it's not moving nearly as much as the equity market vol, which is another kind of fun, meta vol kind of study. So the vol right now is not showing me that this market's getting real excited, which is good for bulls.
Yeah, if you wanted to make a case for, an extreme sell-off, you're right. This kind of anemic little pop in volatility is not exactly holding that up. But then again, if we get closer again to that 30,000 level, we could see that vol start to change a little bit. These important psychological levels do tend to contribute to the volatility out there. Let's see what's going on from an overall expiration perspective, where you folks are lining up right now with your Bitcoin options positions. And as I kind of expected, July kind of has taken the top spot now. I mean, it has been mostly quarterlies dominating the tape for a while. June just went off the board. It was June, SEP and Ds kind of dominating the tape. But people want near-term exposure, especially in this market where things are swinging around. So not surprising that July would finally fight its way to the top. It's got about 34,000 contracts open in July. Now it's up about almost 3,500 contracts from this time last week. Ds is at about 33,400, so a close number two. That's up nearly 2,000 contracts on this time last week. And then we got SEP bringing up the rear with about 28,300 contracts, up about 1,100 from last week. So up across the board, but July just enough to take the top spot out there. What hasn't really changed a lot since our last show is how much notional OI is open out there in the Bitcoin options front. It's pretty much about 4 billion last week. I think it was 4 billion the week before, and it's 4 billion again this week. That's on Deribit, of course. If you add in all the other venues, you're up to about maybe another 4.5 billion or so. Not a ton of size OI open out there right now. It's also reflected in the options volume. We've been saying it for a while. There's been some movement, a little bit of volatility in Bitcoin, but not so much on the volume front. That continues to be the case. In fact, the busiest day we've seen since our last show on Deribit was on the 15th, 368 million worth of notional volume going up. If you've been paying attention, listening to the show for a couple of months at least, that's a far cry from what it was even a few months ago. Back in April and May, we were seeing regular 1 billion to 2 billion worth of notional days out there. And the best it can muster over the last week was 368 million. We'll see if today can top that, but so far, not the case. Eric, does that kind of surprise you that, we're seeing a little bit more vol out there in the space? We're certainly seeing some price action out there in Bitcoin, yet for the last few weeks, we haven't really seen much in the way of options volume to coincide with that volatility and with that price action, Eric.
Well, I think what you're seeing is institutions putting some volume into the market, but they're not doing it necessarily in the derivative space, which is a shame because I think it's a better place to play. Part of that's a regulatory problem.
Like I mentioned, it has been a little while since you joined us. It's been since January. I want you to give our listeners a quick refresher on what your preferred vehicles are for Bitcoin. Are you in the futures? Are you purely in spot? Are you slinging a little bit of options yourself there, Eric?
We're in spot, really trying to work directly with the digital currencies themselves, combination cold storage, hot wallets, really putting priority onto the security of the assets for our customers. I mean, we would never want to wake up in the morning and realize that we had a security event, just like any other professional operator in our space. So we do a lot of due diligence in that regard. And that's primarily why we act directly with the assets when possible. We are very closely watching the regulatory space for derivatives. I am, as a 15-year derivative trader, I'd love to get into the option space. I think there's a lot of opportunity here. I think the risk balancing is much better. We're just kind of waiting for the market to come to us a little bit on that.
Let's see where the market is lining up on the derivative side, on the options front in particular. We looked at from an expiration perspective. Let's look at the strikes now, see where you folks are actually trading out there. I said Bitcoin had threatened the 30,000 level earlier this morning, but it's the 40,000 strike that is still leading the dance out there with about 8,500 contracts open. That's up about 600 or so from last week. Not a ton, but enough to maintain its firm grip on the number one spot. Number two, back down to the 20,000. So a nice 20,000 point range between number one and number two. 20,000 strike has about 8,000 contracts open right now. That's about up 1,200 or so from this time last week. The number three, we're back out to the optimistic side of the fence, the 100,000 strike with about 7,400. We were just talking on our recent show about them listing some optimistic strikes in ETH. Well, they are still open for size here in Bitcoin. 7,400 contracts open. Not really any material change there, but enough to stay at the number three spot. Number four, finally got to go all the way down to number four to get the 30,000 strike. About 6,800 contracts open there. That's up almost 1,000 from last week. So again, not a huge change there. Even that's a strike we've kind of been hovering around and threatening over the course of the past week. And number five, bringing up the rear, is the 50,000 strike with about 6,600 contracts open. Again, that's pretty much unchanged. You know what else is unchanged is pretty much the CME volume out there. Not a ton lighting it up on the options front, and similar story out there on the futures front. In fact, coming into today with this big sell-off out there, we only saw about 3,000, a little bit more than that, contracts on the tape on the futures side. The busiest day we saw over the course of the past week was on the 15th with about 7,600 contracts. So it seems like light volume is the order of the day across the board, Eric, whether it's on the options on Deribit, whether it's the options on CME, whether it's the futures. Pick your poison, pick your product, Eric. Doesn't seem like most of them are doing a lot of volume in spite of what's going on in the broad market.
Yeah, well, we got to look at where we are in the curve right now. Zoom out a little bit. We had a big run up in 2017. Last fall, going early spring this year, we, for the first time, showed that the market's starting to have a little bit of a reinforcing process, a feedback loop. So this environment, naturally, as you would debate any multi-factor investment schema, probably had to do with inflation or psychological relief from COVID, a portfolio rebalancing or whatever it was. But there's growing conviction in this whole market space being real. But this isn't the big one, and these haven't been the big ones. And here's how we know why. In order for, quote, the big one to happen, the one that really establishes crypto as an asset class, it has to capture some euphoria, and we'll know it has euphoria when there's some divergence from reality. And the problem with the last run-up in the last 6, 7, 8 months is that expectations and reality were basically the same. We had all sorts of crypto veterans saying, okay, it's kind of sort of finally happening, what we've been expecting all along. Nobody said, oh, this is crazy. How could this ever sustain or go higher? Everybody just kind of shrugged and said, well, okay, well, it's finally starting to do its thing. Well, that's good. Glad we stuck around for the party. So until the market actually gets ahead of itself a little bit and ahead of the psychology that's already been prepared in front of it, then we're not actually getting to new territory. So I know everybody wants to say that 60,000 was a great accomplishment, but the good news is this 50% retracement we've had in Bitcoin, give a few years, will probably look more like noise than a bear market.
Interesting. I'm sure a lot of people would certainly love to agree with you on that front, Eric. Before we roll out of Bitcoin, I want to pick your brain on another topic that I know it's been near and dear to your heart of late. In fact, you guys just put out a whole newsletter about this. There's been many things that have driven this sell-off in crypto and indeed in Bitcoin. But one of the big drivers outside of the Musk madness and everything else has, of course, been China. They've been doing a lot of hand-wringing over there about what's going on with Bitcoin. They've been cracking down on mining, and some of this is kind of stuff we've seen before. I mean, China really, no breaking news that they're not big fans of Bitcoin and anything that's really outside of their control. So some of this is kind of a repeat of what we've seen before. Others are a little bit more exacerbated. You've been really analyzing this quite a bit. What are your thoughts on what China's been up to on the Bitcoin front, and maybe what impact, what role it's been playing in the sell-off, and maybe if you think that's a little bit overdone?
I think our interpretation of the role is a little bit overdone. Fundamentally, I'm really excited about China. I love the Chinese people and their culture and its great, tremendous history. And I'm really excited to see how they're going to influence the crypto market. Obviously, there are some challenges when you have a state government that sees innovation of this sort only as a risk and not as a potential benefit. Some of the governments in Europe, like Switzerland, for example, really embraced crypto because they saw it as an opportunity for innovation. I think they're just a little nervous over there in China. So the point is, as long as there's a lot of headwind for that country to be able to freely participate in this market, I think the effect is actually being overstated in the media and understated in reality. I think we're trying to price ahead, like you would in a PE ratio, what the long-term effects are going to be. But the truth of it is we just don't know. I think there's a lot of good economic things happening in China to such a degree that they're making 1,000 millionaires almost every day in China. I mean, what does that mean for the global economy as a trade partner? What does that mean for cryptocurrency when this whole economy comes into the global class of citizens who want to travel and go on vacations and spend currency globally? It's a really beautiful thing, and I think it could have a tremendous effect on crypto. We're just not seeing it yet. So they're doing everything they can to participate in the market, whether it's mining directly or trying to transact the currency and off exchange, different types of ways. And that's just not going to necessarily move the needle when you have a multi-trillion-dollar asset class like this.
Interesting stuff as we keep on rolling out of Bitcoin, listeners, and into the altcoin universe.
It's time to move beyond Bitcoin and find out what's moving the rest of the crypto marketplace. It's time to boldly venture into the altcoin universe.
All right, everybody, welcome to the altcoin universe, the portion of the show where we go beyond the big dog, see what's going on out there in the rest of the leading cryptocurrencies. Let's start breaking down the top 10 as we are wont to do out there. Again, standard caveat applies. Take all of these overall market caps with a tasty grain of salt. Number 10, we have Binance Coin floating around 11 billion. Number 9, Polkadot at about 11.3 billion. Number 8, everyone's favorite / least favorite, it's Doge, 22, almost 23 billion. Number 7, XRP, a little bit shy of 26 billion. Number 6, USD Coin at about 26, almost 27 billion. Number 5, it's Cardano at about 36.25 billion. Number 4, Binance Coin, 47, almost 48 billion. Number 3, it's Tether, holding firm in that number 3 spot at about 61, almost 62 billion. Number 2, it's ETH, 213 billion. And the big dog, again, a little bit smaller than it was this time last week. Bitcoin, number 1, 577 billion worth of market cap. Of course, let's kick things off with the number 2. Let's go out to ETH. It was flirting around the 2,000 level on our last show, listeners, about 2,026. Coming into today's show, it's almost exactly 200 points lower, 1828 out there. So a little bit of a sell-off out there in ETH land right now. Got down to as low this morning. It's about just a tick north of the 1,800 level. And that was pretty much the low we've seen so far. But again, the day is young. We're not that far away from it right now out there. So who knows what levels we could see between now and the end of the day. Vol-wise, again, a little bit of a similar story to what we saw out there in Bitcoin. The vol was fairly elevated on our last show, about a 111 in ETH. It had come off somewhat aggressively, and now with the sell-off again, it kind of popped back again today. So we're just a tick coming at showtime, just a tick below the triple-digit level, 99%. It was 111% last show. So we still are down a bit from where we were this time last week. 30-20 SKEW last week was still predominantly negative 3.5. In fact, it has actually mitigated a bit. It's down to about negative 1.2 right now. In terms of volume, again, similar story, not a ton lighting up the tape since our last show. The busiest day was on the 16th out there on Deribit, 147 million worth of notional transacting out there. Again, that's another far cry from the 1 billion levels we were seeing regularly out there in May. So again, light times out there in the ETH. Before we keep rolling, Eric, you mentioned at the top of the show, people more interested, more excited in things beyond Bitcoin. What is lighting up your tape out there in the world of altcoin, in particular ETH?
Yeah, I'm still a big fan of ETH. I think that, again, it's one of those coins that have not retraced as far back and as hard as Bitcoin has. I really think there's some arguments for ETH relative to Bitcoin, because at the end of the day, what's going to get priced is the thing that can, come to terms with consumers, come to terms with street level transactions. And I think there's some technologies based on ETH or within that ecosystem that are possibly going to be the dominant technologies. And so that's exciting. I like that. We take long looks at Polkadot, Uniswap, Chainlink, Polygon, Internet Computer, all these things down the list. I was previously very excited about Chainlink, I have to say, in kind of my recent rendition of how to think about the space, which is always kind of the fun, end of day activity, how to think about crypto. I'm losing my buzz on Chainlink as it simply just being a technology solution, but not possibly the most elegant of all solutions. So, as time goes on, we change our view about these things and their prospects for the future. That said, I do still expect Chainlink and the other coins really till you get all the way down to the sub $1 billion market caps. I do expect them to generally act with some reference point to the overall market. So if you're looking for higher beta trades, I think you're going to start finding those, in the 20 to 30 to 40 down the list assets.
Intriguing stuff indeed. We can probably spend many shows exploring what's beyond the top 10 out there in the world of altcoin. Unfortunately, even the top 10 alone is enough to fill an entire show. Let's see what's filling up your radar here from an overall ETH options perspective. Again, OI actually looking a little bit more robust out here. Call OI was at about 684,000 contracts coming into showtime. It's up about 23,000 from this time last week. So I have seen a little bit more movement on the ETH calls than we did in Bitcoin. Puts 418,000 contracts open right now. It's up about nearly 40,000 from this time last week. So a little bit more action on that front. The notional value of said OI, we have seen a sell-off, so not exactly a huge change out there. Right around $2 billion last week, right around $2 billion this week. In terms of where that OI is lining up from an expiration perspective, it's December actually leading the dance out there right now. 316,000 contracts open in December. It's up about 7,000 from last week. July continues to grow. It's up about 25,000 from this time last week. It's up about 25,000 the week before, I believe, as well. So it continues to grow, but it's still in the number 2 spot, right around 250,000 contracts open in July. SEP bringing up the rear, 236,000 contracts open there. It's up about 11,000 from last week. In terms of where you guys are lining up from a strike perspective, the number 1 strike out there is still the 5,000 strike. That seems so distant from when, let's say, a few months ago when it was far closer. 5,000 strike, 64,000 contracts open. They're up about 1,000 from this time last week. Number 2, finally, we have something knocking down the ridiculous 480s and everything else that's been lurking in the OI for a while. It's the 1,600 strike for number 2. 63,000 contracts open. That's up nearly 18,000 from last week. So we have seen some action on the 1,600 strike since our last show, which is kind of interesting. Number 3, back to those 480s, 46,000 open to those. They haven't really changed. Don't expect them to change anytime soon. Number 4 is the 3,000 strike, the 37,000 open there. It's down about 3,000, and bringing up the rear is the 4,000 strike with about 33,000, up about 1,000 from this time last week. Going on out to ETH land on the CME front. Again, kind of quiet times. The OI is hovering right around 3,200. The busiest day we had since our last show was about 4,700 contracts out there on the ETH front. I know, Eric, has it surprised you that we haven't seen more of an uptake in the CME products? Could be the Bitcoin or it could be the ETH. Or do you maybe think the recent listing of some of these micro products, maybe that's what's going to finally do it and get these products over with the retail out there, Eric?
No, I don't. I think that's the old play. The old play as well. Investors don't have enough money to play with the institutional kids, and so that we're going to make some mini products for them and they welcome them in. I don't think that's the case here. I think there's a substantial amount of money in the crypto space. I think there's a lot of millennials out there who have all been made millionaires, and they don't have any problem buying products with a $25,000 margin attached to them. I think the real thing is people are looking at these exchanges and saying, how are you my friend, or how do you help me participate in this system? And as traders become larger, they're looking for liquidity, and the exchanges are not the epicenter of liquidity, and they're a little bit late to the show on some of these things. So I think the exchanges are going to have to be a little more innovative than just replicating and matching things that are already out there.
Interesting. Well, the volume would certainly seem to be bearing you out right now. In terms of some of the other altcoin out there, you mentioned XRP earlier, Eric. Ripple having a little bit of a light week as well, off about 6.5 cents. So again, not managing to buck the trend out there. Bitcoin Cash down about 62.5 handles from our last show. Bitcoin SV down about 17 points. Before we get on out to the I forgot everyone's favorite, Doge, off about a whopping 3 cents from our last show. Before we get on out to the listeners, Eric, anything else lighting up your tape in the world of altcoin you wanted to share with our audience, sir?
I think there are still some really innovative products happening out there. They're not getting up into the main light right now. So I just encourage people to continue to innovate. There is still capital in this space seeking really great ideas. And unfortunately, we've had a long slog here of ideas that are simply incremental improvements or technical solutions to kind of self-created problems. But I think that there is an amazing amount of capital sitting out there waiting for people to bring forth absolute leap ahead, not evolutionary but revolutionary ideas. And when that shows, get ready, because I think it's really going to light up these markets.
Are you saying Doge wasn't revolutionary, sir? Is that what I'm hearing coming from you? How dare you, sir?
I still have permission in my office to call it doggy, so we're good.
All right, let's keep on rolling. See what you folks have on the brain. It is time to answer your crypto questions.
You've got questions about crypto. Who doesn't? It's time to find out the answers to your crypto questions.
All right, everybody, let's get to it. See what you folks have on the brain. Let's start off with this comment from Mentore7. I like that handle. They say, love the crypto rundown. Right back at you, Mentore. Everybody else who listens takes the time to write in. We love all of you folks out there. Says, you have lured me to the dark side of trading crypto options. Well, I hope that's a good thing. He says, the CME products are too big for me, but I did sell a covered call on Ledger X last week for my first trade. Fingers crossed. Well, glad to see you've been lured into the marketplace out there. Sounds like if you're selling a covered call, you're probably sitting on some Bitcoin. So hopefully that one's been working out for you of late there, Mentoring. Welcome to the show. Glad to see you are learning more about the world of derivatives. At the end of the day, if you're trading these products, this information can only help you and make you more informed trader out there. So even if you're not trading the options or even the futures out there right now, it's still important to see what's going on out there and get a sense for what's going on, because they are very important at the end of the day to the spot that you're maybe holding in your portfolio right now, or maybe some of the other positions you're thinking about adding down the road. All right, next up, we got JVAC. This is, again, we touched on this a little bit earlier, Eric. This is a frequent question. I had a feeling this is going to pop up again today, and indeed it did. JVAC wants to know, does today's sell-off put the nail in the coffin of Bitcoin as a good hedge for a stock portfolio? Well, we kind of touched on this earlier, Eric. What do you have to say for JVAC and everyone else out there who's been hearing this thrown at them for a while, that Bitcoin is this completely uncorrelated asset? Is today the day, Eric? Is today the day that finally is the straw that breaks the camel's back?
Well, just to defend the community that thinks it's a hedge, they're not crazy. But what's important is to remember that derivative pricing and trading environments are bimodal. And to put it more clearly, it's either going to be completely calm or absolutely crazy. And we spend a lot of time talking about the crazy scenario. End of the world, New York is flooded, something insane happens. Yeah, crypto may go down less or slightly get an uptick, or maybe even a big uptick from some very dislocating thing happening in the market. And that's a possibility. And there's a lot of good logical arguments and reasons for that. Some that'll probably self-create that trend. They'll create its own feedback loop. But on your daily back and forth, I remember, the VIX 16, the S&P moves about 1% a day. So we have a couple percent today. We're moving around a little bit. This doesn't have my hair up. It's not a big day. We should not expect any kind of extraordinary departure for Bitcoin when most things are normal. And believe it or not, even in COVID, because it had in February, March of last year, we had a fairly uniform narrative in the market. it wasn't necessarily atypical what was happening. And therefore, those two things acted very similarly. Bitcoin was smashed. And so there isn't a matter of having a nail in the coffin, is that it is or it isn't. It's a matter of understanding what narrative we're in, the degree and the severity of the moves in the market, and if these things are going to act in their normal state, or if they're going to act in, say, a terminal state or a highly duress state. As long as it's fairly normal, meaning there's still liquidity, people can still trade, it can still get priced, then I don't think you're going to see it acting as a hedge. People ought to go to Bitcoin in the currency markets to trade something that has, a different personality. Assuming you're trading it actively, you're not doing a fundamental long-term buy and hold, but you're actually trading it. Trade it because of the same reason people go to the Forex markets or the pork belly markets or the different, commodity markets. They all have different personalities. Crypto has its own personality. It's probably quite a lot like the Forex markets. So if you're a technical chart trader, your patterns probably have a few percent higher probability of working out. And that just has to do with the information entropy of being in a global market space. So you got to know why you're trading, what market you're trading, and have a specific reason. And that should align with why you're trading crypto. Otherwise, there's a lot of other markets to trade.
All right. Well said. We'll wrap it up with this one from Alan. Alan wants to know, where are the big institutions looking in crypto right now? Is it still all Bitcoin, or have they moved beyond it to other products? Doge, maybe. I hope he's joking about that last portion there. But Eric, we've had some guests come on the show recently relating some somewhat alarming stories about what they're hearing from, asset managers, institutions out there and some of their big clients starting to make inquiries into products that maybe, let's say, aren't probably the best suited for maybe a large fund or maybe some of the large individual clients out there. Are you hearing similar things from the institutions you interact with, or from your perspective, are they still primarily interested in, let's say, the Bitcoin and the ETHs out there?
Well, it's important to remember that institutions have a mandate and their clients have a mandate, and sometimes those align and sometimes they don't align. The reason we are specifically a crypto fund is when we find clients who align with being directly in the space, we align our interests with those clients. So I think some clients are going to their advisors because they believe crypto is a very aggressive market, that they have to have very aggressive positions. That's not necessarily true. I think advisors are kind of pushing back a little bit on that. But as far as what assets institutions are buying, so much of that is just dependent upon the life cycle of the institution. If they were early to this market, and let's say their investment committee has approved Bitcoin and Ethereum and 25 other altcoins, they're going to have a great selection to offer to their investors. If they're a little bit more, come recently to the market, there's a high probability they're saying, well, what things can we allow our clients to invest in so they're not going to get burned? Well, I've heard of Bitcoin and this Ethereum thing. Let's just stick to those. Maybe they'll invest in Tether. Who knows? So the point is that it really depends on the degree of sophistication and interest from the institution. I think the bigger actors in this space who we're calling institutions are actually not really Wall Street institutions, but they're family offices, high net worth individuals who are making kind of a philosophical approach, and they're here to weather the storms. They're providing a lot of stability in the market. They're buying large block orders, 10s, 20s, 100 million at a time of these assets, and they're going to sit on them for a while.
All right. Unfortunately, that music means we've come to the end of another epic sojourn through the world of all things crypto. Eric did an excellent job holding down the hot seat out there today. So before we go, if folks are intrigued, they want to kick the tires over there at VELLUM, I've heard a rumor you may even have an interesting starter kit out there for the new Bitcoin investors. Why don't you tell folks about that and where they can go to learn more, Eric?
Yeah, sure. We want to have direct relationships with our investors. There is nobody invested in our fund, invest with us, who we don't know on a first name basis and we haven't had conversations with. And so the first thing that we normally do is just send them an information kit so they can kind of learn the language of crypto and understand how to discuss these things and really think about how these could be a good fit for their portfolio. So we send those out to anybody who's an accredited investor who's interested. We'd be happy to send one to you. If you're interested, just send an email to info@vellum.capital. So VELLUM.capital.
There you go. Check it out for yourselves. Get your hands on that golden Bitcoin. sounds intriguing, Eric. So lots of
we
good.
do send out a nice coffee cup.
There we go. I like it. Check it out for yourselves. Info at VELLUM, VELLUM.capital is the place to go to check out that Bitcoin investor starter pack. And you already know where to go to check out all the analytics we broke down on this show and a whole bunch more. gvol.io is the place to go to kick the tires and light the fires. And on behalf of everybody over there at Genesis and Eric and indeed myself, I thank all of you out there for downloading, streaming, subscribing, for listening live, for sending in your questions, and of course for rating and reviewing the show wherever you get access to it. Really does help all the new folks keep discovering the show out there. Remember, double pro week out there this week, so 2 great pro Q&A sessions coming at you tomorrow. The return of the advisors option a little bit later this week as well. Double educational live sessions out there with Options Bootcamp, Options Playbook Radio on Wednesday. So if you're on the pro and the plus side, you have a lot of great content coming at you this week. Back again on Thursday, of course, with Twifo and episode 2 of the Option Block. Friday, Vol Views and Options Oddities. And we kick it all off again next Monday, another episode of the Crypto Rundown.
This program is brought to you by Genesis Volatility, also known as GVOL, home of institutional-grade crypto options analytics. Whether you're trading CeFi options or DeFi options, cryptocurrencies move. Use GVOL analytics to analyze implied volatility, model realized volatility, structure positions, and unlock alpha. For more information, visit gvol.io. That's GVOL.io. You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions at theoptionsinsider.com.